leadership books, communication books that says, I've done it, you can do it too. And you're like, excuse me, that's not my life. You don't know my situation. You don't know my environment. It's really important for people to honor what their barriers are, the external ones and the internal ones. How you own your power is knowing which ones are the real barriers and which ones are the ones we created because of the way we were raised, the societal issues, the stereotypes.
From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about work on our own terms. Now, have you ever looked up from a table and realized that you are the only woman at that table, maybe the only man, maybe the only young person at that table, or the only gay person? That one happens to me kind of a lot. If you've ever felt this way, you get that it can be a lonely and isolating experience, and sometimes it's kind of hard to bring your true opinion to bear. But here's the thing, if you believe, as I do, and we do in this show, that a diversity of thoughts and opinions is how we arrive at our best new ideas, it's how everything gets collectively better, then being an only anything at a table is an asset. Our guest is Angela Chee. Now, Angela spent a good portion of her career as a TV news anchor. And in that role, she was kind of used to being the only. Often the only Asian American, sometimes the only woman. Today, she is a media and communications coach, and she has a new book out. It's called The Power of the Only: Own Your Voice, Thrive in Any Environment. Well, folks, she is going to bring us the principles that she has divined for how you, too, can thrive in any environment. Let's get into it.
You know how you always feel like whether you're the only person or the only voice in the room, and obviously I'm an Asian American woman. Yeah. You're a woman, you understand what that feels like, but it's not just about women. I feel like onlys are people who see, feel, and understand things differently. Maybe they're trying to shift the status quo, break through barriers, right? They're innovative, and you have to navigate certain things that onlys do. So there's different layers to being an only, but it's really that only person or that only voice in the room that's trying to create change and just do it better.
I deeply know that. I
Yes.
think most of our listeners have at some point experienced what it feels like to be an only. I am a queer woman. I have spent a lot of my career working with men in business journalism, and very often I was the only woman at the table, maybe the only gay person at the table.
Yes.
And I come with all of my socialized ways of being and communicating and talking, and everybody else has a different way of understanding each other.
Yes.
And that is really sort of the foundation for the conversation you're bringing us into, right?
Yeah, and I think like all of us feel like an only at some point. Right? I've always felt like the only one, right? Growing up as the only Asian girl, working in TV news, working in Hollywood, and navigating these spaces.
And early on in TV news, I'm just going to stop you because I don't want our listeners to miss this. You really were the only, right? You were the Asian face that people saw on their TV on this show that you were on.
Yes. And I started in small markets. And so certain parts of the country are not as diverse, right? So I was always the only one. I didn't mind it. I loved those communities. Mm-hmm. But you knew you were kind of representing everybody. But what I'm saying is that there's so many layers to being an only. And so I've always felt that way. And so I went on a journey to feel like, well, I feel that there's power in that. Not always. I didn't grow up that way. I was that shy girl with a bowl cut and glasses. But I evolved. But other people, when I see them step into their only, I wanted to find out why. What was the through line? And so I spent 4 to 5 years interviewing people on my podcast, and I discovered that more people feel like an only than not. And so I didn't want to write a book just for women, even though we feel it very strongly. Right. And I feel like all the onlys, it's my gift to the onlys of like, how did some people step into their only and some don't?
Well, this idea of stepping into your only, I love, because you just teed it up like I was an only and that worked for me. But I believe that you stepped into your only. Mm-hmm. You made it work for you. Yes. And the book is powerful because it offers us a pathway to embrace this idea that being the only can be our superpower.
Yes.
So maybe you want to lay out a little bit of what you hope people are going to understand about the experience.
You said it. I believe that being an only is not a weakness. It's your greatest strength.
Yeah.
And I think that when we can harness that power, when we realize everything that we've been through, every challenge allows us to step into our only, that it's not a weakness. It's those things that allow us to see beyond what other people can't see. And sometimes it feels strange and it feels hard, but ultimately that is your power. And I think that we can harness it. And I think organizations and companies can harness it too, but we have to see it first.
Okay, so you talk a little bit in the book about this idea of abundance versus scarcity.
Yes.
That really resonated for me. So describe what you mean.
Yeah. I really feel like how we can own our future, which is principle 5 in the book, is that we have to move to that abundance mindset. Now, growing up with immigrant parents, it can mean that abundance and scarcity in that way, right? I grew up not having enough, always feeling not enough. Like my parents would be like, oh, well, don't do that. I'm like, I want to do this. Don't do this. And I feel like that mode, it's however you were raised, whatever levels you have, whatever culture you're from, how you're raised. And I have men in the book that grew up very poor. And so they have a scarcity mindset that even though they're very successful now, it's never enough.
I don't want to skate over this word mindset because that's what you're talking about. You are essentially inviting us to entertain the idea that it's all a little bit pretend, that we are shaping our sense of reality in our mind. And if we grew up culturally with the understanding that everything was scarce, and maybe that's resources, and maybe that's emotional energy or opportunity, then we're carrying that mindset forward until we choose to disrupt it ourselves and choose a different path, right?
Yes. Well, but what's interesting is that it's part of who we are. So it's almost like we have to recognize it. So I consciously, even when things are going well, sometimes I think well, what's going to happen next? That's wired in us, right? And you don't get rid of it. You don't say, oh, well, now my mindset changed, and so I'm all better now, right? Even I talk in here about appreciating celebration. Celebration, that's one way that you can go from scarcity to abundance. I didn't celebrate when I was younger. My parents downplayed everything. Some homes are like, yay, everything, celebrate everything. In my culture, it was like, oh, that's great. And then we moved on. Yeah. And so cultivating that in yourself, it could be buying flowers. Like when I buy flowers, I get this voice in my head, too expensive, too expensive. So it's not just wealth, it's also just the idea of it. And so when you move from survival to thriving, it's saying that I deserve this. It's okay. Something's not going to go wrong. And for every person, it may be different, but it comes from how we were raised, as well as societal influences. And so it's important to know where it comes from so that we can counteract it.
Okay, so you said, well, that's principle 5. Let's back up for a second and talk through your 5 principles.
Great. So the first principle is own your opportunity, right? And owning your opportunity is about not just owning what's in front of you, but when someone says, that hasn't been done, that can't be done, there's no room for you, right? That you choose to see beyond that because it hasn't been done. And that's the only way you're going to carve that path.
But in truth, I would imagine that we, in small ways, every day in our lives, come up against, oh, you shouldn't try that. Oh, you shouldn't do that. And make a decision in that moment, whether it's worth trying anyways, or how true we think that belief is, right?
And it's cultivated, right? I didn't just show up. Like we talked about, I was the shy girl with a bowl cut, right?
Right.
How did I become this person? And people ask me that. And I think it's through little acts of things and getting validated, right? That boldness is built by trying it and having it not work out.
I love what you said there about this idea of practicing failure. Because part of this is about being less afraid to fail. And I don't think that's something that you can decide to do mentally. I think you have to learn to cultivate the feeling of failure and the knowledge that you can move through it.
Yes. Yeah, well, I'm wired. That's one of my wiring is, am I getting this right? Am I getting this right? And so if you want to get things right, you're not trying and you're not failing. Yeah. And I have an extra added to that. It's not just the failure. It's the validation of doing things right. But you have to try things in order to get that feedback. So I don't think too much failure is good for you because that can take you in the other direction. And so that's what I mean by guard your energy. I think it's important for us to try things. Yeah. People ask me, what was it for you? And I think it's because my 7th grade speech teacher said, why don't you enter the speech competition? I was like, me? And I was pretty shy. And I think I came into myself in high school and then I just kept going from there. But in the early years, I was not. And it was something totally new. Didn't necessarily feel good in my body. I didn't know. But someone said, you should try this. And then I got validated. I didn't win. I think I got 3rd place, but I did it. And then I tried it again. And then I got more opportunities. Then I ran for student government. And then, you get a little failures along the way, but you have to make sure that you keep doing things that allow you those little wins to build up that energy to keep going.
Yeah.
And that's why I think protecting your energy is important, because you don't want to fail too much, because then that will chip away your self-esteem. But we have to be really honoring, like, what can we do and what can't we do? But giving ourselves these little wins allows us to keep going.
Yeah, I hear that. Okay, so where are we in the principles now? Or have we reached principle 2? Yeah, we're only on 1. Let's talk about principle 2.
Principle 2 is own your power. Own your power is knowing that you already have it. Right? I could go on, but it's being able to take up space, that you don't need to get it from the outside. It's the power over an agency. And so knowing that it's already within you gives you that power.
Okay, so how do we learn to take up space? Because you have foundationally said that this can be learned. And there are a lot of us here who are introverts by nature, or who have never gravitated toward public speaking, who don't want to speak up in meetings, who are perhaps not feeling like they do take up their own space.
Yes. And I think there's a reason why you have to know what your barriers are. So in every chapter I talk about, here's how you own your opportunity, here's how you own your voice, and here's why you don't. Right? I think that's important. I think leadership books, communication books, it says, I've done it, you can do it too. Here's what you do it. And you're like, excuse me, that's not my life. You don't know my situation. You don't know my environment. And so I think it's really important for people to honor what their barriers are, the external ones, and to actually honor them, that, this isn't fair. This isn't working. And the internal ones. So knowing, I think how you own your power is knowing which ones are the real barriers and which ones are the ones we created because of the way we were raised, the societal issues, also stereotypes, right? And so I think it's important, and I do a deep dive into that because I feel like it's important to honor where we came from, but you have to understand where your barriers lie before we can overcome them.
Yeah, and is that something we can all get better at?
Yes, because it starts with self-awareness about yourself. And I think that we're so busy, we don't take the time to do that. My whole life, I wanted to be like Connie Chung. I watched her on TV when I was 8 years old. She was that North Star, right? The only Asian woman on TV. My dad said, hey, you could be like Connie Chung. And I said, me? Who knew 19 years later that I would be? So that's just the beginning of my story, right? But knowing that wasn't enough. I had to create that, right? But I didn't feel that way in the beginning. And all I cared about was getting to the top, right? And then I got to the top. But then when I left the news business, it was like, wait a second, what do I stand for? Who am I? Where do I get stuck? I didn't even know that I had internal barriers, right? And then I started unpacking. In my 20s, I didn't know any of this stuff, right? We were taught, do good, win this, be that, pick your career, work from the bottom, work your way up, right? We talked about, I interned at BBDO. I talk about that in the book, how like scarcity was built in, work hard, whoever stays longest wins, all these things. And I got to the top. So why would I change anything, right? I work from a small news market. I work 7 days a week at times, hardly got paid anything. I worked my way to the top, and great, success story. I'm now a LA TV news anchor.
Okay, and I love this moment because this moment reflects reality for so many of our listeners. You get to the top, and it is the top that you think you were working toward your entire life. And then you realize it's kind of an arbitrary top.
Yes.
And then you realize it may not even reflect what you want. But how do you know what you want?
Yeah, who thought about that in our 20s? Who sat down? So now what I help people with, who are you? What do you stand for? And how do you want to show up in the world? That is what I call being you amplified. That is my communication process that I take people through. But who was thinking about that? I just wanted to get to the top. And I remember it was interesting, my first personal development. I had never done any personal development because I didn't know I needed that. I didn't even realize I had any problems. And then when I went to this, I was like, oh, that's where that comes from. Oh, you mean I blame my immigrant Asian parents for that? Oh, you mean that's why I can't have a relationship, right? Like I was just go, like all those things. And everyone has a different personal development journey. Some people are still on it and they've never taken a good look of where do my barriers come from.
I got to say, some of our listeners are going to be wondering, like, what exactly is personal? Are you talking about therapy? Are you talking about one of these courses or frameworks?
Yes. I think for everyone it could be different. It could be a book, right? It could be a weekend retreat. This one was actually a room where you had to talk about yourself. It was like a weekend retreat, very personal development. I was a TV news anchor in Los Angeles, and my husband had healed his family through this process. And he told me to go, and you want me to go into a room and talk about my problems with the public? I'm on television. What are you talking about? And I said, I don't have any problems. But I was wired to not have any problems because I was the girl, the older sister that got everything done, that did everything right. And I got rewarded for it. So why would I do anything different? Right? Until I realized like, oh, I have some stuff that maybe I block things out. Maybe I don't process stuff. Maybe I don't celebrate. Maybe that's why I don't have a boyfriend, and this was at about age 20, 27, 28.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. And that's the time I actually healed my relationship with my parents. Not everyone may have this, but in a lot of Asian families, we never said, I love you. We never hugged. And for some people, they're still going through that journey, and every family has their own dynamics that they need to heal. But it was fascinating to me that my parents came to this country, and they are beautiful people that work so hard, and I never honored them for that. I was so busy chasing success that I was like, great, I have great parents, and they worked hard, and they were immigrants. I never realized how strong they were because in your 20s, you're a little selfish.
Yeah, you're by design. Yeah. Okay, so honoring your past allowed you to, it was a process for you for building an awareness that became a foundation for you to use to make different decisions about how you move forward. So how did you think about those decisions and what were they?
Yeah. Well, honoring your past means a lot of times people kind of push back their past. They're like, oh, well, that was hard, or I was traumatized by that. That didn't work. I actually look at it as like, all the things that my ancestors carried down, they had such hardships. That's what built up the resilience inside me. And that's invisible sometimes, right? And you don't realize it till you get older how much wisdom that you have inside. And now, when I was younger, I would say I went through a phase where I didn't want to speak Chinese in public, right? We had shoes that lined our front door. And before my friends would come over, I would hide them, right? Chinese food. My dad made Chinese food on the weekends and made us pass it out. And I was like, oh, no, I don't want to pass it out. It's so embarrassing. And people liked it. But now, who knew now, like Din Tai Fung, every kid is like waiting for like Asian food all over the place. But back then, it was a little bit different. And I think with not just my story, anytime you feel different, you don't want to show up that way. Yeah. And for me, it was like food and different cultural habits. For other people, it could be other things. And so I think there's a story behind that of like what we honor from our past and what we bring forward.
Well, so what did that unlock for you in your career journey? You had been this powerful TV anchor.
The actual transformation didn't actually happen until I had my first child. So the transition in my 30s was really just breaking open that I even had barriers. Then you're like, great, I have barriers. I'm still successful. Let's move on, right? So I think they kind of got buried until the next challenge. So I feel like that opened up a lot of stuff for me about letting people in, of not being the only one, right? Being able to ask for help a little bit more. And then I continued on. Not until I became a mother with my first child and I left the news business did I truly understand. I was like, oh, I was chasing external success, right? Instead of building internal status. Right? And the internal status, when you lose, and a lot of people are going through career transitions right now. If you lose your job, you change careers, you become a parent. All these life transitions, I feel like every 5 years, every 10 years, however that transition is for you, we have to recalibrate and do that same process over. So just that one personal development wasn't going to allow me to step into myself. But when I became a mother, I went through a huge transition and I went back into that mode of like, let me figure this out. I'm going to do everything right. You can't do parenthood right.
No, it turns out you can't.
And so all this chasing, and then I burnt out a bit. And that's what allowed me to really sit down and recalibrate. So I had left the news business after all these years, and I went into hosting and speaking and building my consulting practice of communication coaching. But I sat down with myself and I said, who am I? What do I stand for? And how do I want to show up in the world? And I literally closed my eyes. I remember I had a little breakdown, and then I sat down and I channeled it. And I sat there and I go, you know what? Everything I've ever done was always about helping people own their power and their voice. Being on TV was just an avenue to show up. It was not about being on TV, right? It was that Connie Chung had a voice. I'm going to have a voice. I'm going to share other people's stories. My parents didn't have a voice. And so I felt compelled to, when people say that when they feel less than or they can't do it, And I just always felt like, no, yes, you can. And so I feel like I was wired for this because I think I see people beyond what they're capable of. And I love being people's cheerleaders. And so that I really felt that. And so that's when I built my communication practice and built the process that I went through for myself is the process I take my clients through now.
Well, so where are we now on our principles?
I think we're on our power, but I think we've jumped around. They don't really go in order. I think a lot of those things that we talk about aren't really in each principle. They're more like things layers that we need to do for ourselves, and they're all in there, whichever order that you do them in, so that you can really peel back all those layers and get to your core.
So much of what it means to communicate well is to understand yourself, to build the awareness to know what you stand for, what's uniquely your point of view in a room. And it's actually alarming the degree to which we don't always understand our own point of view, our unique point of view. How about the piece of how we express it?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So owning your voice is the next principle, which is different than own your communication. What I mean by owning your voice, same thing, knowing that you don't have to find your voice. You already have it. But it's also the voices that you hear in your head and the voices that you believe, right? So that's your voices. The communication aspect is actually the tactical parts. How do you sound more credible? How do you show up? And so I move from this kind of personal development mode into actually, now let me tell you how to communicate, right? Like actual tactical, what can I take away? How can I show up more confident? And it's actually the process that I take people through. But I think the number one thing about communication, if we move into like own your communication, is understanding your audience. It's not always speaking, it's actually listening. And before you speak, whether you're speaking one-on-one, to a group, giving a speech, being on a panel, whatever you're doing in your career or just in your personal life, who are you talking to? What do they care about? And how can you serve them?
Right.
What's your point?
Right.
And I think if we start from that point, yes, I teach people how to sit and how to stand, and I have some breathing exercises in there and confidence boosters. But ultimately, are you aligned internally of how you're showing up? And are you actually connecting with that person? Because that's the ultimate point of communication, is connection. And it starts with understanding your audience.
Okay, so let's talk about that connection piece. There's a magic to human connection, and it is the most effective way to get somebody else to come around to your point of view on anything. How do you nurture it if you don't experience it right away with someone? You sit down across from someone and you just sort of know right away, like, oh, I don't think this person's going to get me.
You're like, oh, this isn't working.
They did not laugh at my joke, whatever it is. And in that moment, I'm just going to say, and I experience it a lot at an interview table. Thankfully, I'm not experiencing it with you, but right? And in those moments, things can go south immediately. And there's like an energetic thing that needs to happen for me to be able to right the ship and continue. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for how to handle those moments when we realize like, oh, it's not quite working.
If someone's just not on the same page with you, I think it's important for you to understand where they're coming from and see that what they have to say, even if it doesn't align with you, has value. Like, what can I learn from this person? But we may not be on the same page, and it may show up energetically. So it's almost like I talk about a little bit about bridge building in that book, about seeing someone for the value that they provide, even if you don't agree, like being open-minded and curious to, what is that perspective? But what you're saying about how can you get them onto your side, sometimes you can't, right?
Yeah.
And if you can't, it's okay.
That is really important to hear.
You know? And so that's the thing. Communication is about connection. You can connect on certain levels on different things. And sometimes a lot of part I talk about in the room is discernment, right? When to honor when this room's not for me. This conversation's not for me. And that is the power of the only. When you've owned your voice, when you've owned your power, you've owned your opportunity, you owned your communication, you know how to connect, you know how to speak to people, you understand who you are, you show up fully, and the room is still not for you.
Yeah.
Then the power of the only is to say, oh, thank you. And that could be the conversation, could not, this person's not for me, this place is not for me. And ultimately, we don't want to do that right away. Yeah. But if you've done all those things, the power of the only is knowing like, not today, not my job, not going to do this. Because I think it's really important for us to choose what we let in, what is our responsibility, and what is not. Yes, I told you to own your voice, own your power, own your communication. But ultimately, in order for us to own our future and to step into all these, uncertain times, is to know when to go into thriving, right? To shift those mindsets, know that what got us to where we are now isn't going to get us further, and to have those discernment and healing tools of knowing when to say, it's not my turn, not my day, but to understand that you have the power to do it if you want.
I think in this moment, that idea is so important. And it feels to me like what you're talking about with thriving is the opposite of burnout. You're talking about how you continue to do the work without feeling overwhelmed and overrun by the work of figuring out how to show up as the only.
Because being the only is hard. There is so much power in it. But we also have to have discernment, protect our energy, and get to honor our past and choose what is our responsibility. Being in the room changes the room. It's not always your responsibility to change the room.
So for you personally, are you always thriving?
No, I wouldn't say that. But the difference is when I was younger, I didn't know I wasn't thriving. Now I know, I consciously know, this is not good. I stayed up too late. I should have said no to this. I should have pushed back on this. This is not good. And now I go, oh, well, let me do it differently next time. Even when you're not thriving in the moment, you can be thriving overall because you've stepped into yourself and you understand where your limits are and what's not.
That is the gift of middle age.
Yes. And
it's pattern recognition. It's flat out pattern recognition. But it doesn't save us from the difficult moments. Maybe it just allows us to get through them more expediently and with more energy.
Yes. Well, and you have to understand now as you get older, what's hard is that you realize there's a lot of difficult moments. Right?
True.
No, you're right. I have aging parents. I have 2 teenagers.
Oh, my goodness.
There's always something.
Yeah.
There's always something. I'm juggling all these things. So I'm not thriving every single moment of the day, but I would call that thriving because that's part of understanding the ebb and flow. So we have to honor what life stage are you at. But when you know who you are, what you stand for, and how you want to show up, honoring your life stage, honoring your values is better. We have to sit down with ourselves. What's my goal right at this life stage? Right? It's going to be different when my kids go off to college. I'm going to have to do this process over with myself, right? It shifts. But honoring your life stage and where you're at is so important.
That was Angela Chee. Her new book is called The Power of the Only. Look for it wherever you buy your books. And I want you to walk away from today's conversation with some powerful things on your mind. First of all, let's talk about barriers. There are external barriers. You can't do much about those. And there are internal barriers, the kinds of biases and ruling beliefs that were seeded in your childhood. Those you've got a lot of power over. Take the time to reflect on them, understand them, get some outside counsel to work on them and break them down. Don't let them hold you back. Second, and this gets to that outside counsel, personal development. See it as a tool. Personal development is going to help you become more clear about what you uniquely have to say and offer and why it's important. Whether that's outside work that you do with a counselor or a coach, whether it's journaling every morning or a mindfulness practice, take the time to get clear in yourself. Finally, and this is the most critical one, you got to know when to walk away. Some conversations are just too small for you. Some places are not places where your voice will be heard. Learn to recognize those places and don't put your time there. Look for the places where you will be heard. I'm sure you probably have a lot of your own ideas about what it means to be the only at a table. I want to hear about them. So why don't you join me this week at office hours? Just as we do every Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern, Sarah Storm and I will go live from the LinkedIn news page. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can just go to LinkedIn and search for the news page. And last, do me a favor, if this show meant something to you, will you take a moment now to send it to a friend? I have this vision that all people should live into their full potential, and a huge part of that is doing work that matters, getting compensated well for it, and feeling great while you're doing it. It's what we talk about every Monday here in the studio. I'm Jessi Hempel, and I will be right back here next week. Hope you will be too.